This is what the completed little book looks like. It is about 2 inches thick and 5 inches tall and 7 inches long. It has a magnetic closure here in the front. These two pieces open and it reveals a 3-section tunnel book. So let's see how this comes together. For the mini album, we have medium weight chipboard to cut. It's listed under the mini album section here under the medium weight chipboard. And then I've also got some coordinating cardstock cut out and scored in accordance with the coordinating color cardstock for the mini album on this page. So first we'll do a little chipboard prep, and I'm going to start by gluing up my spine pieces. There are 4 pieces listed for the back section spine, and we'll glue those in sets of 2 so that we'll have 2 double thick pieces for the back section spine. And then for the front sections there are 8 pieces, and we'll glue those together in sets of 2 as well, so that we'll have 4 double thick pieces. And I'll just put them under some weights to dry. Next I'll take one of my back section front back pieces and 2 of my front section back front pieces, and these are going to be my fronts for those sections. Now the back section goes horizontally and the front sections go vertically, so that when it comes together it's like this. So we need to cut an opening in each one of those pieces, and we'll measure in 1/2 inch on the 2 sides and the top, and 5/8 of an inch up from the bottom. So 1/2 inch in from the 2 sides and the top, and 5/8 in from the bottom. The same thing with these 2 front pieces. The only difference is make sure you hold them vertically so you get the 5/8 of an inch down here. This will be the bottom for those front sides. So I'll get a sharp craft knife blade and cut out those openings. Next I'm taking my marker to the inside of the frames. You don't have to do the outside. And I'm going around that and then around that inside edge on each one. And then I also have 4 ledger strips that we'll use, and I'm going to take my marker to the front and lightly on the top and the bottom as well. Next we're going to mark some lines 1/8 of an inch in from both of the vertical edges on both the front and the back piece for each of these 3 sets. Make sure you have them oriented this way so that you're always drawing your line on the 5-inch dimension. And we'll draw the lines on the inked part of these frames. So repeat that for all of your sections. Next we'll do a little prep with score tape, and to do that I'm going to turn all of these over so that I'm working on the side that does not have the line on it. I already flipped these over. And for the ones that have a frame, you want to make sure you have good coverage on the edges. I had 1/2 inch score tape, so I used that on the 1/2 inch side, and then I just put 2 pieces of 1/4 inch down here on the bottom, and I'll do that for all the frames. And on these solid pieces you can just run 1/4 inch around the edges. And then I also have 3 other pieces out here that I need to prep with score tape around their edges. I have one of the pieces labeled back section top base, and I have 2 of the pieces labeled front section top base. We're just doing that on the base, so that's why we have 1/2 of the pieces out here. So I'll go ahead and get those all prepped with score tape. First we'll finish our frame pieces with some of our cardstock, and so I have the pieces of cardstock out here that are labeled back section finishing and front section finishing. And here I have one of the front section finishing pieces. And I think you can see here, according to the cutting guide, I have scored this at 1/2 inch in on all sides, and that will allow me to turn this over and center that right between those score lines. So I'll finish removing my score tape backing and do that. Once I have that attached, I'll give it a good burnish, and then I'll flip it back over and I'll cut out the inside cardstock right even with the chipboard edges. Just be careful and run your knife right along the edge of that chipboard. And I'll repeat that for the other 2 frames. Now for the pieces that don't have a hole in the middle, it's just a matter of removing the score tape backing, adding a little extra regular adhesive in the center there, and then centering that and burnishing it down on your piece of cardstock. Next, I'll prep all of the tabs on all of these pieces with score tape. I'm using 3/8 inch here. And then once I have that on, I'll fold these edges over and use my phone folder right along the edge there so that it will get used to wanting to turn in like that. And I'll repeat that for all my other pieces. And then we'll cover the one side of our base pieces with cardstock. I've just removed the score tape backing here, and I'll put it down on my piece of cardstock, and then I can trim around the edges and burnish that down. Once you have these base pieces covered, you could just put them aside. We won't need those for a while. We'll start by prepping our joining pieces, and these are listed as joining pieces back section and joining pieces front section in the cardstock cutting guide. I've already scored them at 3/8 of an inch in on both their left and right sides, and now I'll reinforce those creases with my bone folder. And once I've reinforced those creases on the outside, I'll put 1/4 inch tape along the narrow channels here, and then on this wider section I'll fill in with score tape so I get good coverage, and the back sides are wider than the front, so just use whatever size of score tape you have so that you get good coverage on that back channel as well. But all of that score tape goes on this outside side, and I'll repeat that for my other pieces. So now that we have these pieces prepped, let's do a little checking. These work as the side pieces that go to connect a frame with a solid back, and they come in here on either side like this so that the fold comes up against the line on the chipboard. Now, even though this is 1/2 inch wide, this was drawn at 1/8, so this should be 3/8. It may be that if you hold that up to the line, a little bit of this edge will show through, and you don't want to see that happen. So you may want to just trim about 1/16 of an inch or so, or check first. You may not need to do any trimming, but it's always easier to trim now and trim about 1/16 of an inch or a sliver off of the sides of your joining strips. Now for me, I find it easier to do this trimming with the score tape side up. Sorry for this glare. And that way it's a little less slippery. That may not be the case for you, but I just hold it firmly, and then I go gently at first and then make a second pass, and I can easily remove that sliver. Now we're ready to attach these pieces to our back of each section, and When we cut the cardstock, it's 4 7/8 inch tall, and the chipboard is 5 inches tall. And that's the same whether we're working on the back section or the front sections. And so that means that this piece of cardstock is 1/8 of an inch shorter than the chipboard. And when we install this piece, we're going to split the difference so that we have a 1/16 of an inch of chipboard showing here up the top and a 1/16 at the bottom. And we'll remove the score tape backing on one of the little trimmed 3/8 inch sides, and we're going to take that and fold it and put it right up against the 1/8 inch line. And remember to split your difference so you have a 1/16 of an inch at the bottom and the top. So you should have something like this, and then you'll go ahead and burnish that in. Then take your other piece and do the same thing to attach it to this side, remembering to center it top and bottom. The side without the score tape faces in towards the inside. Now once we have this assembly made, we're going to attach it to the frame, but only on the right side here. The right side is we're looking at it here. And when you've got your frame sitting here, make sure that the wider part, the 5/8 of an inch section, is at the bottom. And then we'll take this strip of score tape off, this 1/4 inch piece of score tape, and we're going to align the fold with this line here, and again center it top and bottom. So I'm using the lines on my score mat to make sure I have everything straight. I'm just picking up the tab and looking across here. I have the score tape backing removed and it's folded, and now I've lined it up here on the line, and now I'm ready to attach it in place. And then I'll give that a good burnish. So that's the unit we'll have at this point, and we can just set that aside. And then I'll repeat that process for my 2 front sections. Now that we have these units made, we're going to add some ledger strips, and on the back bottom I'm going to cut a piece to length, probably a little bit shorter than the distance between these 2 tabs, so maybe about 6.5 inches. And I'll install this strip a 1/16 of an inch above the bottom edge of the chipboard, which should be right in line with your pieces of cardstock here, since we held those back a 1/16 of an inch. Now that I have this piece installed on the bottom edge of the back, I'm going to turn my attention to the front. Here I'm going to cut a piece that is just the length of this opening here, which is about 6 inches. And I'm going to install it so it's a 1/16 of an inch above the edge, but even with the cardstock on this end, a 1/16 of an inch up. And so over here, it should kind of line up with this edge of the frame so that we'll have enough room when we bring the tab from the joining strip in. So install this again a 1/16 of an inch up from the bottom edge. Then I'll flip this around and I'll cut another piece that's 6 inches long, and I'll install it the same way over here on the top of the frame so that I'm leaving this area free, and I'm holding it back a 1/16 of an inch from the edge of the chipboard here. And then I can finish up on this edge by just installing another piece that is 6 or 6.5 inches long, and again holding it back a 1/16 of an inch from that edge. The ledger strips for the front section go in basically the same way. The only difference is their length, of course, because these sections are smaller. Cut the ones in the back to fit in between these 2 pieces of cardstock. Use the edges to align that 1/16 of an inch up from the bottom. And then on the front, cut these pieces 2.5 inches long, and make sure when you install this again that you're leaving this region over here open so there'll be room for the tab to come in. And again, 1/16 of an inch up from the bottom of the main chipboard. Each of the panels in both the front section and the back section have what I have called a panel support piece that is cut out of cardstock. These pieces are listed on the cardstock cutting guide, and they also call to be scored 1/4 of an inch in on both of their sides. And there's 4 for the front and 3 for the back. Now we need to cut out a window in each one of these, and the measurements that we use are the same whether we're working on one of these front pieces or the back piece. The key is to keep them oriented in this direction. The back pieces go in a horizontal format, and the front pieces are more vertical. This is one of my front sections, but as I said, the measurements are the same whether you're working on a front section piece or a back section piece. And we'll measure in 5/8 of an inch from the side. The sides are the same place that you did your 1/4 inch scoring, so measure in 5/8 of an inch on both sides. Once you have the sides marked, turn it, and the top is going to be 7/16, and 7/16 is 1/16 of an inch shorter than a half. I think you can see down here where I've got that at that 1/16 of an inch mark. That's going to be my top. And of course you would do this in pencil. And then I'll flip it around, and the bottom will be 9/16 of an inch, and 9/16 of an inch is 1/16 of an inch greater than 1/2 an inch. You can see down here it's 1/16 of an inch greater than 1/2 an inch. So I'm going to cut that frame out, and I'll repeat that for all my other panel support pieces. Next, we'll fold on our score lines and reinforce that fold with your bone folder. And then we're going to put score tape on that tab. Now it's a little bit narrow for 1/4 inch, but I'm still going to use 1/4 inch. I'll run it right up to that fold line. And then when I have that on there, I'll flip it over, and I'll trim off any excess carefully with my craft knife. And I'll repeat that for all of the other panel support pieces. For the panels, I'm going to work on my black mat because I think it will be easier to see. And this is the first panel in the back section. And the first thing I want to do is to cut some decorative paper to go on top of the panel support piece. So I've cut a piece of decorative paper that is 4 3/4 tall by 6 5/8 inches wide. And then I'm going to flip it over, and the first thing I'm going to do is put some 1/4 inch score tape right along the 2 short edges, just the 2 short edges, and go right along the edge. So the 2 sides are going to be cut right along that 1/4 inch. We'll do that last. And then the top and the bottom have slightly different measurements. The bottom is 7/16, and if you're using directional paper like I am, make sure you have the bottom lined up when you go to cut that. So it's 7/16. So I'm going to use my ruler and cut between the 2 score tape strips 7/16 up, which is 1/16 of an inch less than 1/2 an inch. So there's the bottom cut made. I'm going to flip this around, and the top cut is 5/16, which is a 1/16 of an inch more than a 1/4 of an inch. So 5/16 on the top. Once I've made those two cuts, I've just kind of put a little tick mark out here with a pen that I can see on my score tape so that I know how long to make the 1/4 inch cuts. And when I make those, I take the ruler on the inside, it'll butt right up against that score tape, and then I can make the cut on each side. Once I make those cuts, I can put some score tape on these two pieces, and then I'll do some inking, of course, and then I'll have a nice decorative panel to go on the top of the support panel. So this is the little scene I'm going to have for my first panel. You can, of course, have any kinds of scenes that you would like. So let me show you how this comes together. It basically has 3 parts, and I just have them put together with some temporary adhesive. I have this fairy that comes from this card, and I have a piece of pattern paper that I cut with my grass die, and right here I've cut underneath her leg so that this grass can kind of slip up underneath there. And then it has this piece, and this piece with these children comes from this card right here. You can see where I've cut along and then cut along right there on that little mushroom. So those are the pieces that go together to make the first panel. And here is the completed panel 1. I just used a little bit of wet glue to attach the elements. And I don't think that I said that when I cut these out, I went around their edges with a brown distress marker to get rid of that white edge along the cut edges of the images. So there's panel 1. For the second panel, I've again cut some decorative paper to accent the panel frame the same way that I did for the first one. 4 3/4 tall, 6 5/8 inch wide, 1/4 inch strips on the 2 sides. The top is 5/16 inch tall and the bottom is 7/16 inch tall. And then here is the little scene that I've got planned for this panel, and let me show you how it comes together. On this side I have a little group of mushrooms. They came from this large card, and on the back here this little group of 2 fairies sitting together comes from this card here, which has everything but these 2 little mushrooms, and these are a scrap from some card. I can't remember which one. When I cut things out, I just save all the little pieces. And this is obviously a piece that I've cut with my die, and then I just inked it up a little bit. And I think this is just a piece of solid color cardstock that I used here. And then here's panel 2 completed. For the third panel in the back section, I'm using this green speckled paper for my accent for my frame. And then this is the little scene. Much of this is covered up by the first 2 panels. So I just have a strip of grass, and this is cut from that green speckled paper. I'm just using the other side. And then these little fairies that are sitting here under the mushrooms come from this card over here. And here's panel 3 all put together. Our first step in assembly is to put some pattern paper on the back panel of this section, and I've cut this piece 4.5 inches tall and 6 5/8 wide. That will allow it to sit on top of this ledger strip down here at the bottom, come in about 1/16 of an inch on either side of the sides here, and then it's just coming up a little bit onto this ledger strip at the top. You can see that green there, that's the remainder of that ledger strip. And I've prepped this with some score tape around the outside, and then I'll fill in with just some regular adhesive there and go ahead and attach that panel down. Now to attach our panels, we'll start with the back panel first, panel number 3, and it gets centered top to bottom in the joining strip here. The edge of the tab goes right next to that crease, and you can put it in this direction to get it in there, and it should line up exactly at the top and bottom and then fit into that crease there. So I think you can see here it's about 1/16 of an inch away from the edge of this paper, which had a little bit of a reveal there, and it's just attached here to that joining panel, and then I'll make sure I give that a good burnish. Now to put the second panel in, its tab goes up right next to the edge of the first tab there. So we're going to have it makes the 1/4 inch spacing there in between. And again, make sure you give that a good burnish. Then fold that panel over, and the front panel goes in next. And there may be a little bit more than 1/2 inch left here, so you can choose to bring this forward just a little bit so that you split the difference there. Just make sure you get it in nice and straight, and go ahead and burnish that tab down as well. Now we're ready to do a little bit of enhancements on the front here. This is the paper I've selected to decorate my front of the section, and I've cut it 4 7/8 inch tall by 6 7/8 inch wide. And I'm going to cut an opening in this. The sides and the top will be 3/8 of an inch, and the bottom will be 1/2. So 1/2 on the bottom, and the sides and the top will all be 3/8. So I'll cut that frame next. And to save myself some measuring, I've just put 3/8 inch tape on the sides and the top, and 1/2 on the bottom, and then I can just cut right up against those edges. And if you don't have that tape, just go ahead and do your measuring and put the kind of tape that you do have on those edges. So after cutting this frame, I inked the edges, and it's ready to be installed on the front. I'm going to add a couple of decorative elements to this piece of chipboard here. First is a strip of grass, and I'm just going to have the grass poking up a little bit from the front there, and I just used a grass die to cut this and installed a strip of score tape there. It goes edge to edge, and it will just fit right inside there and give a nice little accent to the front. And then to add a little interest in the top corner of that front frame, I'm going to use this die from this Tim Holtz die set called Garden Greens. You can see it sitting right here. And I've cut it out twice, and I'm going to attach them together just so that I have a little more sturdiness to that element. After I adhered the two layers together, I did some inking and I used my green marker around the edges. And now I'm just determining the placement that I would like to have. And the key thing here is that if any of the leaves would go over the top edge of this ledger strip, or beyond the edge over here, you need to trim them out. But attach enough of them so that you get it on there sturdy. And that's what those leaves look like up there in that corner. And you can, of course, attach anything else that you might want to that frame. So now's the time to take a good look at your scene and make sure you don't want to add anything, because at this point you could still reach into any of these frames and put anything else that you wanted to behind there. So just take a look and make sure that you are happy with everything that you've got inside of this section. Once you're happy with all of your scenes, we're ready to attach this flap to all of these tabs here. You want to make sure that everything is in alignment. It should be nice and straight and flat. Have everything really nice and flat here. And then you'll be able to see your tabs here, and we'll remove the score tape backing. And once you have everything good and flat and square, just fold this piece down. We'll be able to reach in and burnish from the inside. Now you can put this on something and then reach in with your bone folder and burnish these pieces down. And then we can remove this piece of score tape, just this 1/4 inch here. This fold lines up with the 1/8 inch line that we drew over here. Now, theoretically, you should be able to join it by pushing it flat, but I find that sometimes it might not want to get on that 1/8 inch line. So remember that this is the joining tab here stays down a 1/16 of an inch on both the top and the bottom from that edge. And just line that up with that 1/8 inch line that you drew at the beginning. And once you get that lined up, you should be able to just put some pressure on it this way, and then of course go ahead and burnish that. Now we're ready to put in our spine pieces. These are the double thick chipboard pieces we made at the beginning. Let's do a dry fit first. These are 1/8 of an inch thick, and remember we have this 1/8 of an inch here. And these are sized so they should fit right in between there and fit right down in there, just very nicely. So the way they go in is we'll run just a little bead of glue along the chipboard on either side, and then remove the score tape backing, and we're just going to do one at a time so that we can make sure we get it in there nice and square and that it sets up nice and square. So I've run my glue on either side, and now I can just put my piece in. And then just put a little pressure on that and make sure it is being nice and square there, and allow that side to set up before you do the other side. Once you have both sides in, just let it thoroughly dry before you move on. Once the spine pieces have set up, you can just kind of gently wrap those in and then set it on the edge and take your bone folder on the inside and again do some burnishing there. Once you're finished with your burnishing, you can add our top and base pieces. The top is the piece that does not have any cardstock attached to it, and we'll do this by carefully running a little bit of glue along the tops of those two ledger strips on either side. And I'll put the top piece in and hold that in place, and then I'll repeat that with the bottom piece, making sure that the part with the cardstock faces up inside of the unit. And I also ran a little bit of glue just along the top edge on the two spine pieces. Next we can wrap our tabs around so we can finish the edges, and I'm going to do that by mitering the corners. Now if you have a hard time judging that 45 degrees, you can measure in, this is a 1/2 inch tab, so measure in 1 inch from the corner in both directions, and then you'll be able just to take your scissors and come to the corner and then continue on to that other corner. And then once you've made those little miters, go ahead and attach all these tabs down. Then once you've got those tabs put down, use this piece of finishing strip that we made at the beginning to cut some little pieces to fill in and go right here to wrap those last edges. And once you've done that, give everything a really good burnish. And then we'll just set this back section aside and work on the two front sections.